We will now turn to our final panel of the symposium, which is on nuclear supply chains, current approach, and expanded use of AI. So this session examines how artificial intelligence can strengthen supply chain resilience and efficiency in the nuclear sector, from procurement and logistics to risk management and predictive analytics. We will explore current practices and future opportunities for AI integration. Our keynote speaker for this session is Kevin Lee. Mr. Kevin Lee leads the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission's Disruptive, Innovative, and Emerging Technologies, DIET, team, which aims to ready the CNSC to evaluate and regulate activities that will implement DIET. He is engaged in readying the CNSC for the regulation of SMRs and active on numerous other files across the broad spectrum of the nuclear sector, with emphasis on nuclear-specific AI technologies. As a regulator, his contribution will be to draw out some of the unintended consequences of deploying AI models in the nuclear supply chain and considerations as to how the AI supply chain also needs to be considered. Kevin, please welcome to the stage.
Thank you. And thank you, Ed, for this honor. I'm going to basically touch on three themes as I go through my talk, and hopefully it won't take too long. So the first theme I'm going to mention is what the future might look like. And just so you know, I have the easiest job at the CNSC. A past president told me, or told the executive committee at the CNSC, Kevin has the easiest job at the CNSC. All he needs to do is predict the future and tell us how to be ready for it. So with that said, we, about 5 years ago at the CNSC, developed a thought experiment. And this is relevant to supply chain. The thought experiment was way in the future, 20, 30 years from now, what might the supply chain look like? And what we came up with was that there was an AI entity, and I'll use the term AI entity throughout my discussion, or digital entity, whatever you want to call it, who was in charge of predictive maintenance. It predicts that a pump is going to fail in 2 days. And it says, you know what, that pump's going to fail. But that AI entity is also in charge of advanced manufacturing. So it says, you know what, I'm going to print that pump. Pump gets printed, and it says, well, you know what, I'm also in charge of installation. And I have drones and robotics that I can use to install this pump. So I'm going to install the pump. And to our mind, that is what the supply chain of the future, 30, 40 years out, was going to look like 4 years ago. I don't think we're 30 to 40 years away from that. So that's kind of setting out there what the future of our supply chains may look like from a physical point of view. Now I'm going to touch on an experience within the Canadian supply chain and how you learn lessons. So Canada went through a number of refurbishments lately, but there was one that happened almost 15 years ago, and it was a single unit power plant. It was way over budget, way over time. And part of it was the supply chain wasn't mature enough, wasn't ready for that refurbishment. They thought they were, the operator thought they were, but they weren't. Lessons were learned, and they were able, as we've gone through other refurbishments of some of our other facilities in Canada, they've been able to do them basically under budget and under and before the predicted finish date. So that's happening. Now, where I'm going to draw in something else on this, so number one, yeah, your supply chain has to be ready, and we've heard about that, and we've talked about that. But so far, it's all been about the physical supply chain. And one of the things that we're not really talking about, and we need to start talking about as a nuclear community, is the supply chain you're going to have in place for your digital or AI entities, because there's not a lot of discussion around that. And that was really brought home for me about 2 weeks ago. The regulator of fusion in the UK had conducted a survey, and there was this large international consulting firm that was conducting a survey about the supply chain for fusion in the future. And they started interviewing me, and I started talking about, some of the, and I have a bit of a background in fusion, just enough to confuse things. And they were asking me questions, and it was mostly based on the physical supply chain. In fact, it was entirely based on the physical supply chain. And I said, well, let me interrupt you for a minute. I want to start talking about, the digital supply chain, the AI supply chain Fusion's going to need. And they said, well, what do you mean? And I kind of explained it. And they said, well, no one's talked about that yet. And that wasn't part of what we were supposed to ask. And I said, wait a second. How many people have you interviewed so far? And they said, well, you're about number 30. The point is that Fusion, sort of a new entry into nuclear, by and large, they haven't actually had a facility that's operating commercially, was not thinking about sort of the supply chain for AI and digital. So that's point number 2. Point number 3 is that nobody can do this journey on their own. I'm going to talk a little bit about some international cooperation journeys. So I'll go back to 2021, where the United States, US NRC, the UK ONR, and ourselves, the US CNSC, started to cooperate around what we called innovation. So the innovation hubs got together, we talked about all the things we were looking at, and to be honest, in 2021, we weren't focusing a lot on AI. We were focusing on additive manufacturing, we were focusing on digital twins, we were looking at drones and robotics rather heavily, and kind of AI was this, yeah, whatever. It only took about a year until about 2022 when we started realizing there was a vacuum around AI. And we realized that there was nothing out there in terms of guidance, in terms of safe deployment, any considerations around that. So being only 3 regulators, we thought we can be pretty nimble about this, and we started to work on what ended up being the Canuckus, or the principal paper, the white paper, trilateral paper. And if you're interested, look at any of our respective websites. You can find that paper. It was, in essence, published in September 2024. Now, while we were doing all of that, and it's a high-level principal paper. If you know anything about it, you remember the heat map. We were also working with the ISOP network. Now, what I think is lost in this whole conference is the fact that it's actually the ISOP network that's hosting and putting on and running this whole thing. ISOP, as you know, stands for Innovation to Support Operating Plants. And I keep telling Ed Bradley, who leads it, you've got to change your name. Because the work we're doing around AI, around drones and robotics, around advanced INC, and around advanced manufacturing, those are sort of the four subcategories right now. Anything you're going to do with an operating plant will be applicable, or that technology is going to be used in SMRs. So I keep saying you are the de facto innovation hub. So long story short, Nellie, who's in charge of the working group from the IAEA in terms of AI, pushed us and helped us develop a consideration paper that went in more detail, and that was published just recently on AI, Considerations for Deployment, in October of 2025 by the IAEA. Now, while all of that was going on, there was this other organization called the Vienna Center for Nuclear Nonproliferation and Decommissioning. And there's an individual there, Sarah K. Slackner. If you don't know her, look her up, get in touch with her. And for the past, I'm going to say 18 months, they've been doing a lot of great work around supply chain, cybersecurity, and AI. So a partnership was developed. And remember that in both the ISOP example, the example I just gave with VCNPD, it's regulators, it's operators, it's technical service providers, and it's academia. And it's all sharing on an international basis these ideas. So that is going on. I encourage you to get involved in that work. They've put on some great workshops. They've published some really good papers. So take a look at that if you want to sort of think about supply chain down the road. And what was developing at the same time was this concept for a reg lab. So Ed Bradley from the IAEA and ISOP, and a fellow by the name of David Smetham, who at the time was the innovation hub lead at the ONR, had this concept for a reg lab. David had done it at the UK with the ONR. And the idea is you get regulators together, you get industry together, you get the service providers, the same cadre of individuals. But instead of doing it domestically, let's do it internationally. So we also had this other thing called the Canadian Nuclear Society Diet Conference. Mo Fadé, who's here as well, who's the father of that conference, allowed us in 2024 to pilot that at the Canadian Nuclear Society Diet Conference. At that time, it was only the US NRC, UK ONR, and the CNSC who were involved in this. We published a paper of our findings, And we looked at predictive maintenance and what does predictive maintenance look like and how would that look in a nuclear future. So long story short is this was hosted by EPRI. They funded it. The NEA was there, and the NEA took a look at it. They really liked what they saw, and a woman by the name of Faiza Sefta basically championed it at the NEA, and it is now a project of the NEA where you have 7 regulators. We're looking at near-term deployment. We're looking at things like cyber and AI. We're looking at, again, predictive maintenance. We're looking at issues that are going to be coming, and I would suggest that this is a perfect forum for something along the lines of AI, cybersecurity, supply chain. I'm also suggesting that ISOP should have a 5th working group, and that working group should be along supply chain. So long story short is that we did that, again, on the margins of the Diet Conference in Canada. Paper will be published in the new year. Take a look at that. But if you want to get active in that, get a hold of the NEA, get a hold of myself, and I can help you kind of get engaged with that process. So the 3 things I want to leave you with is, number 1, that you have to really think, what does the future of the supply chain look like? What are the components going to be? It's not going to be our traditional supply chain. How you're going to verify and make sure you don't have CFSI, is going to be completely different from what it was 5 years ago. You have to have, in essence, that building of the supply chain, and you also need international cooperation. No one country, I don't think, can do this. No one regulator can do this. You need that international cooperation. And with that, we'll see what the panel brings to bear.
Thank you very much, Kevin, for opening up this session, this panel, and for walking us through sort of where we've come from the purely physical supply chain through the digital supply chain, AI, the players involved, your ideas for future collaboration and how to strengthen this whole space. So I think you've set us up really well for our conversation. So I would like to invite the other panelists to the stage, and I will start by introducing Mr. Mark Kamphausen, who is Senior Vice President, Global Customer and Partner Success Management at Oracle. Mark leads Oracle's global customer success and partner success organizations. Based in the UAE, born and educated in Germany, he holds a degree in nuclear engineering and a postgraduate credentials in economics. Representing Oracle as a globally renowned AI innovator, his teams are at the forefront of AI adoption. They help customers realize measurable outcomes from early machine learning to agentic AI to improve operational resilience and efficiency, always with rigorous security. Mark, welcome. Mr. Nathan Playman is head of global growth at Cameco, driving strategic initiatives across international markets. Nathan brings extensive experience in strategy, M&A, and innovation leadership within the energy and resource sectors. Previously, Nathan held senior roles at BHP, shaping global energy strategies and advancing decarbonization. Passionate about sustainable growth, Nathan regularly contributes to industry forums on the energy transition, critical minerals, and technological innovation. Welcome. And Dr. Andy Vickers has 30 years of experience in leading edge international engineering. He has held a broad range of leadership roles. He is currently the Chief Technical Officer at Capgemini Engineering, with responsibility for the application of AI as applied to engineering research and development. He holds master's and doctoral degrees from the University of York, is a chartered and European engineer, and a fellow of both the British Computer Society and the Institute of Engineering and Technology. Welcome, Andy. So nuclear supply chains are among the most complex in the energy sector, supporting the deployment of new capacity from large-scale reactors to SMRs and advanced designs, while sustaining the long-term operation of existing plants licensed for 60, 80 years or more. Building resilience and adaptability into these supply chains is essential to meet near-term project demands and ensure reliable performance over decades amid diverse regulatory frameworks and engineering standards. So this panel will explore how AI can strengthen resilience, improve efficiency, and reduce risks across the supply chain, from procurement and logistics to quality assurance and regulatory compliance. I'll take my seat, and let's begin by understanding the current challenges. Welcome, everyone. And then move towards our future opportunities, as we've been doing throughout the symposium. How can AI transform supply chain strategies to support safe and timely nuclear deployment? So maybe, Nathan, I can start with you. How do you view this issue? And could you illustrate your thoughts with some real-world examples?
Thank you. And firstly, thanks to the organizers. This has been a great event, so thank you for putting it on. I think everyone would agree that the nuclear sector has been a boom-bust sector over the years, and the pain of that, while felt by many, is particularly felt by the supply chain. And as we look now at resurgence of interest in nuclear and looking at gaining traction on new builds, getting traction on a number of different reactor technologies, which is all tremendously exciting, you have the supply chain kind of waiting to see what's actually going to happen. And is this going to be a repeat of the past, or are we actually going to start to scale up capability and capacity to meet this tremendous groundswell of interest? I think there's a couple of challenges that are interwoven amidst that. One is the lack of capacity in the supply chain to meet the demand, the swell of demand that's actually coming. And we're seeing that at Cameco and Westinghouse. And then also the supply chain looking at a fairly fragmented technological market and trying to pick winners amidst that. And how do we align the supply? It's a bit of a chicken and the egg. How does the supply chain kind of prepare itself when it's not really clear which technologies are going to go ahead? And even then, when you have a firmer view of the technology that's going to be successful, and even when you get a final investment decision, is it actually all going to come to fruition? And so that's where, I guess, if I speak a little bit, I don't want to speak for Westinghouse, but Cameco is an owner of Westinghouse. One of the things that we're talking about with them is how do we work with the supply chain very closely in a very integrated way, recognizing that, I guess, for the industry to be successful, I think we all know we need to collaborate very closely and work together in an integrated way. How do we really work with the supply chain to rebuild that capacity and don't make false promises? So.
Well, thank you for the intro. And Andy, I see you nodding, so maybe I can turn to you and ask you for your views.
Thanks, Lisa. I mean, I think I take Nathan's point completely about it's difficult to choose the right technology. And I think if I would make three points really in this space. I think one, I think it's important to acknowledge that actually if you don't live your life in AI, actually it's a pretty confusing market space. It's difficult to really understand what the reality is. The way this technology hits the market now is very different to the way technology has hit the market in the past. In the past, we've been able to rely on work that's come through universities, peer review, there's a level of rigor and authority that comes to it. And we don't really live in that world anymore. New technology appears weekly, almost. And often it's non-linear in its changes, and language around topics like reasoning, trust, full AGI, they're used without that much rigor, if the truth be told. And they're driven by the need to drive economic arguments in terms of it. There's a lot of vested interest in it. So if you're not living in the world, it's hard to know which bit to back. Mm-hmm. And actually, to decide how to bring this to scale, and the topic is only interesting when you think about it at scale, you need to get a little bit past the label of adopting AI. It's a little bit like saying, let's adopt maths. It's like, yeah, okay, but what bit of maths and for what purpose? Mm-hmm. Because the reality is, if you look at the classes of AI that we talk about mostly at the moment, you have discriminative AI, the ability to recognize things. You'll all have experienced that dozens of times today if you've been anywhere near a bit of computing equipment. That doesn't generally get called AI anymore because it just works. So you have all of that. That's interesting, particularly in manufacturing control in this industry. You've then got last year's hot topic, which is generative. That's interesting, not because of text or code, although of course that is interesting, But the reason why that's so transformative is because if you have the data, you can generate anything. Biology, chemistry, chip layout, manufacturing control, you can generate anything. So that really is transformative. And if you look at this year's topic, which we haven't talked about too much, apart from Kevin raised the topic in the opening, the whole issue of agentic, the ability to have really significant levels of automation, huge levels of personalization, and really just changing the way we interact with the compute layer. No longer having to define exactly who does what where. We've got agents now that are blurring the boundaries across not only just silos inside an organization, but across supply chains. How are we going to govern that? So I think to start to think about how to apply this at scale, we have to kind of get past the label of AI, and we need to move past thinking of isolated use cases. If you look at the playbooks across different industries, the first phase that everyone goes through is getting people in a room and trying to identify use cases. What can we do with this technology? The problem with that is it tends to lead you down the technical route. And if you look 10 years ago, the adoption of AI was only a technical problem. It was, can I build a model? That was it. The technical issues are still important, but actually, if you're going to adopt AI at scale, the technical is not the hard bit. These are organizational topics. These are core context. Where are you going to place the cursor between risk and opportunity? How are your execs aligned on how to do this? Thinking about individual use cases is not the right lens. Much better to think about AI or the provision of AI as a business-critical part of your supply chain. So as Kevin says, the importance of digital supply chains now. Leading businesses in this space now see their AI provision really as part of a stack, a utility like any other utility that has its own ecosystem. It's managed in a particular way. There are cyber, there are sovereignty issues. And it's then how you enable the business that is then driving the management of the supply chain. So the lenses have to change.
Great. Well, thank you for those introductory ideas. And can I turn to you, Mark, for your thoughts on this?
Absolutely. So Lisa, thank you very much. Now, let me start by mentioning, actually, I fully believe we see a renaissance of the nuclear energy. You just mentioned it before, Nathan, right? The interesting piece, actually, I'm a nuclear engineer by education, but I moved out of the industry because when I graduated, actually, in my home country, Germany, we didn't have jobs for nuclear engineers. That turns around completely in the meantime. So I spent my time in the IT industry. The question is, I think the why we seeing the renaissance of the nuclear energy is quite simple. Number one, we have a growing energy demand. Number two, I think everyone is talking about green energy, and of course, nuclear may be the bridging industry. You mentioned fusion, till we have fusion energy. And last but not least, we're here to talk about AI as a solution. But AI is also part of the problem, just to be very candid, because we know AI consumes a lot of energies. I'm here now to represent Oracle, and the funny thing, as an Oracle employee, is quite usually, many people don't really know Oracle. Many see maybe Max Verstappen and Red Bull, and know that we have something to do with databases, but most people don't know that we are actually the backbone of the AI infrastructure. So we have the most data centers, and we are currently also in the process of building super large data centers, especially in the US. We are also going to leverage SMR reactors to power them. So the interesting thing in this discussion is actually, yes, AI is part of the problem of the energy consumption, but also potentially part of the solution to it. Right? So what is also quite important in regard to the challenges in regard to supply chain, I think everything was already mentioned. It's about counterfeit items, for example. I think we need to talk not just about AI, but also a blockchain in this context, because AI is just a technology. It is just a technology. But the beauty comes usually if we're combining different kind of technology. Everyone with an iPhone knows that, because Steve Jobs didn't invent anything new. He was just combining different kinds of technology to something which is just genius. So if we are starting to think about combining things like blockchain, things like AI, with what we already know, then I think we have a very interesting future.
Okay. Kevin, I have a few questions, but I'm going to let you start.
Well, I was going to just counter a few things that we're saying and
Perfect.
just sort of look at the supply chain of the future, every single aspect of it will be touched by AI. And to put that into perspective, just let's say the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission. We have about 1,000 employees. We're a true life cycle nuclear regulator. Everything from mines to mills to medicine to power plants to waste. In Canada, if it's nuclear, we regulate it. 1,000 people. AI is going to touch on every single one of those, every supply chain for every single one of those entities. And the question then becomes, where do you get the human resource in that supply chain who understand AI and understand nuclear? And I'll just throw it out there that we've looked internally and we're still debating this. Is it easier to get someone who understands nuclear and upskill them on AI? Or to bring in someone who understands AI and upskill them on nuclear? And I think the real crux for the supply chain down the road will be that human capacity that can get both.
Very interesting, thank you. And actually talking about people, I think what you were saying, Andy, about it's a business critical part of the supply chain, that there needs to be leadership buy-in, right? And so we're talking about the people who are going to be the doers, but we also need the leaders who are going to enable it all. And I actually want to talk, you mentioned blockchain, Mark, and so maybe for the whole panel, do you think that the integration of AI with other innovations like the Internet of Things, blockchain, what we've been discussing, and other advanced manufacturing, is it already benefiting the nuclear supply chain, or are we seeing this in other industries?
Happy to comment on this one. I think the beauty of my job is actually that my team is globally responsible to help Oracle customers to adopt to AI and adapt where it's required. And I think in general, the rule of thumb is that 2/3, let's talk just about supply chain management, 2/3 of supply chain customers today are already adopting AI. So it's widely adopted in different areas, right? And especially the combination supply chain management and IoT. Things like predictive maintenance, things you just said. In other industry, they're quite common. Also, combination with blockchain. Let's talk about life science. Let's talk about the food and beverage industry partially. It's already being used. And I think just looking into different industries, there's a lot of things we can learn from the other industries, partially also regulated industries. So clear answer is yes.
Okay. Andy?
I think the combination of the technology with other things is absolutely key. Absolutely key. If you stay trapped in the AI world, and there is a huge temptation to try and do everything in the AI because the industry tries to encourage you to try and do everything in the AI. There's talking about building more and more specific models, bigger models, but that's not the way to do it. The people who are making progress here are combining the technology with other things. The AI tools will only get you so far. Training only gets you so far. Fine-tuning only gets you so far. RAG only gets you so far. Guardrails only gets you so far. If you really want to get precision and reliability in, you need to combine it with things like knowledge graphs, with physics models, and those playbook patterns are becoming much more mature now. Mm-hmm. So AI at scale, really, it's a systems engineering topic. It's about deciding where to put the functionality, where in the supply chain to give you the rigor that you need for the function. And we're going to see more and more of those multidisciplinary topics coming in. I'll give you just one more example because it's been talked about a lot during the last 2 days. It's well accepted that AI gets things wrong. You know, we made up this new word, hallucinations. It's rare for my boss to tell me that I've hallucinated. I normally have just cocked up. Yeah, I made a mistake. We need to be really talking about defects and defect management strategies. Our usual defense to this is that, don't worry, we have human in the loop. Well, yes and no. For some things, human in the loop is okay. But if you're presented with something that's complex, if you've lost situational awareness, if you don't know what human in the loop is not going to help you at all. And you have sociological issues going on here as well, because the models, particularly the text-based models, they're so human-like now. You know, if Harvard Business Review reported a month ago, #1 use of these models now is for personal therapy. People are using them and assuming they are human. You have that sociological effect. But from a technical point of view, they're just probabilistic. They're not human. And from a safety and reliability point of view, they fail differently. They don't fail the same way. So it's really easy to be fooled by pure AI solutions. So multidisciplinary combination with other things is absolutely key to roll out at scale.
I see you nodding. Did you want to build on that, Nathan? Yeah, okay. Mark?
Yeah, one comment also, we heard this earlier today a little bit, right? Because there is not just one AI. There are different categories of AI. There's predictive AI, there's Gen AI, right? There's agentic agents, there's all kinds of AI. And we should also keep in mind that we need to tailor the use and the right IA models and the right things to the business or to the outcome we want to achieve. Nowadays, everyone is talking about LLMs, large language models, right? Everyone is using LLMs with ChatGPT, but they're not the right solution for many of the problems we're talking about here. So we need to be a little bit careful that AI in general is not a silver bullet, but we need to pick the right models to find the solutions we need to find.
So we're in the current status part of the conversation, and we've already hit on a number of challenges. So I'm interested in how AI is helping to manage risks linked to the timeliness of delivery, to cost control, quality, including minimizing the risk of CFSI, right? Counterfeit, fraudulent, and suspect items. So can we explore this a little bit more, sort of what we're seeing and already helping manage these risks? Nathan?
I might just start with a higher level view on that question. When you're running the business, we like to look at it through the lens of value and risk. And we take decisions on the basis of value and risk. AI speaks to both, and it really, in many ways, is a productivity and efficiency tool. Maybe for past sins, but 5 years ago, I found myself running the supply chain for one of the biggest mines in Australia. We spent about $1 billion a year on our supply chain, very complex, and that's a very painful job. And you're trying to keep a lot of people happy, keep the business running, and every day you hear something's not there, or the part's not on the shelf, or we got the wrong part, or so on and so forth. And meanwhile, the team's trying to optimize the supply chain at all times. We're trying to get lower costs. We're trialing different vendors. We're trying to reduce inventories. So there's a constant tension, between value and risk when you're managing a supply chain like that. And 5 years ago, we did not have AI, and we thought fairly advanced. Working with all the right consultants, working with the right technology vendors. But I can just imagine, putting myself in my shoes just 5 years ago, with the tools that we have available to us today with AI, what's possible from a value and risk management standpoint. There's so many opportunities to apply this in the supply chain. So I'll let others speak to maybe some of the more detailed applications, but it's everywhere you look.
Okay, thank you. Some detailed applications? Anyone want to jump in?
Yeah, I think in terms of the playbook in this space, particularly when you look cross-sector, I think it's becoming increasingly mature. And I think the comment about the future's here, but it's unevenly distributed. I think if you look at the adoption of this technology globally in different sectors, it's very heterogeneous. And I think from a competitive positioning point of view, it's instructive to think that actually the leaders in this space, and I'm ignoring, if you like, traditional application of AI, which is decades old. It's already been said before that the technology is mature. You can go back to the work of the 1930s and 1940s with Margaret Masterman for some of the language work that's driven this version of LLMs. So ignoring that, if you're looking at the application of this generation of AI, the leaders are 2 to 3 years into this space, and there are people that have not started at all. But if you take advantage of the global landscape, you can, and it's been talked about a lot this last couple of days, knowledge management has effectively become a solved problem. Although if you talk to the digital sociologists, and that's now a thing, if you talk to them, they will tell you that you must take care because these models, they tend to collapse shallow knowledge systems. So if you give these things to junior is not the right phrase, inexperienced people, it's very hard to pick what's right from what's not right. If you give them to more experienced people, they can really turbocharge. But the whole knowledge management part now across the supply chain and sharing information, pretty well established. Real-time monitoring of supply chains, responding to geopolitical changes, supplier changes, tariff changes. There are solutions that do that look for solutions and propose them very, very quickly. If you need to take carbon out, you need to take cost out, all of that, again, there are tools that will bring AI to that topic. Digital twins, so you can then ask what-if questions across the supply chain. Again, relatively well established. And operative co-pilots and now physical AI across supply chain. Again, just becoming a reality.
Okay, Kevin.
So as a regulator, it's my job to occasionally say there's a ton of promise, but. And I'm going to throw out a but that we discovered, and it's around predictive maintenance. And predictive maintenance in and of itself sounds absolutely wonderful. You know, you'll get the part when you need the part, you'll know when you need it, everything's going to be great. Now what that means as an operator is you don't have to worry so much about the redundancy of parts. So your inventory can drop dramatically because you know when things are going to fail. And when we looked at this in the Reg Lab exercise, at first it seemed like a no-brainer. How could you not do that? And then someone raised the concept, okay, that's great, but what if we had another global pandemic and supply chains were absolutely not in place anymore, and you had to just find it wherever? You could potentially be exacerbating the CFSI problem by using predictive maintenance. Now, no one would have predicted the pandemic that came. I mean, some people did, but no one believed it. So you have to protect against what would be considered almost impossible. And as a regulator, you struggle with how much do you allow when you have a situation that's near term in everyone's mind that totally disrupted supply chains.
So I agree completely. I mean, it's obviously it's probabilistic range. It's not an absolute, but I take your point about the reduction in capacity. I think what the technology can bring to this is the ability now for a regulator to, you know, if the supply chain has the digital twin, has the modeling there, you can now ask the questions. Okay, what would happen? Show me what would happen to your supply chain. Mm-hmm. So we have the ability to ask those questions and then take a view based on what's the cost if this happens, how much can we afford to manage, and so forth. So I think the technology can still help, but I completely agree with you, it's not a panacea, it doesn't make these problems go away, but it allows you to have a different kind of conversation.
And actually building on this, Kevin, because you raised a point I was going to ask you all about, but you know, we've talked about no country can do this alone, no company can do this alone, and that's even more so true for the supply chain, of course, the nuclear supply chain. And given its international nature, what gaps exist in harmonizing regulatory frameworks or engineering standards and ensuring transparency across borders? You know, how can we look at it from that angle?
I'm going to jump in because
you brought a prop.
I took a prop.
Got a plug.
So most people will recognize this. I mean, NPPs are producing power. Does everyone know what this is? This is an adapter. I can't plug in my electronics here in Austria because it's different in Canada. It's different in North America. UK, it's different again. So wherever we go, we have to travel with an adapter. We've had, conservatively 140 years to harmonize this, and we've not. So that's a bad example of international harmonization. But what I will say is, when you look at AI, when you look at how AI will influence supply chains, it's happening very quickly. I'll look back at, we used to, a number of years ago, we'd say, you know what, we can handle AI because we've had experience with innovative technologies, SMRs, for instance. But you want to know something? That technology was always in our wheelhouse. It was germane, it was our day job. And yes, but 15 years, and yeah, we're on top of SMR technology. We don't have the same timelines for international, for getting engagement, getting everyone together. So what I'm suggesting is there's an ability right now to take this new innovation and truly harmonize it. Who does it? I will turn to, like ISOP, for instance, should throw supply chain in there. We need international organizations to start driving that harmonization.
I would like to make one comment on regulation. I see some key challenges regarding regulation. We know regulation takes time and effort, bringing people together and so on. Now, earlier today we heard actually that every 3 months there's basically an iteration on what AI can do in our industry. Every 3 months nowadays. Now, I think the key challenge is actually to bring this together. The one need for regulation on the one hand side, on the other side, the speed of innovation, right? And what we tell our customers usually, actually, please apply, we call it a crawl a walk, a run, a fly approach. That means we need to start somewhere, and we may need to experiment with models where there's less or very little risk, where there's humans everywhere, and we need to go from there. Because if we wait too long to finalize all regulations, we can't plan the future for next year right now. If I'm talking with my peers in product development and asking them what is going to happen in AI in 24 months from now, they tell me, I don't know. I can't tell you. I can tell you what is going to happen in 3 or 6 months, but not in 2 years.
I just build on that. I don't envy the challenge that regulators are faced with here. With a technology that's moving as quickly, as Mark was saying, like AI, how does regulation keep up with that? You know, I think it's extremely challenging. I'm not even sure that it's possible. And I think there's an important element then of how we think about industry bodies and governments. We're doing a lot of work around guidelines and guidelines that can be supportive of the industry. I think everyone in this room wants to see nuclear succeed, and that's why we're all here. And all of us as leaders, have a part to play in that. If we can look at the regulatory environment across borders as an enabler of nuclear, and how do we work together to enable this and don't end up with plug converters in the future. I think there's a huge opportunity there, and if you tie that back to the supply chain, one of the things that we think about is how do we enable some of our smaller vendors and our local vendors, because we're always thinking about how do we bring the benefits of nuclear to the community. And so there's also opportunities when we're talking about providing guidelines, providing information. There's an education component to this, and there's an information leveling component to it as well. And when we're leveraging conduits around the regulatory environment and leveraging guidelines and promoting information, we have the opportunity to touch into all elements of the supply chain, engage with some of these other vendors to bring everyone up to a common understanding and help us all as an industry move forward together faster.
Great.
If I may, just one additional topic. If we're talking about AI, and as soon as AI gets involved in any kind of creating proposals or decision making, we may need also to consider that there is an ethical thing which we need to consider in the background. For example, it could be just a simple decision, okay, I'm going to buy this spare part right now, or just going to wait for 2 weeks. Is it just cost efficiency or is it safety first, right? And as soon as we leave this decision not too long to humans, but to AI, or at least AI is proposing something, then we need to also to think about those things, which may become part of the regulation one day.
So I completely agree. I think there are things that organizations can do themselves, particularly about having ethical guidelines. I think there's a whole playbook of things now. Look at the best in breed across that. I think there's a playbook you can just pick up now to take that forward. I think the whole topic of AI regulation and standardization, I mean, it's a very open topic at the moment. I don't obviously get the sense that nuclear is going to lose control of the dialogue here. But other sectors have lost control of the dialogue. Industry has overtaken them in terms of the application of this technology. And if you look at AI, it's so new, it's changing so quick, it's a very political topic, it's driven a lot by economic zone thinking, and very different across just with a Western philosophy, the three or four big areas, never mind taking a more global international view. Is it risk-based, is it principle-led, is it absolute? We can't even yet agree on what an AI system, the definition of that is, what does AGI mean? There's lots to think about there. It's still being driven by case history through legal challenge. That's still happening. That again influences a lot of organizations' adoption in terms of where they place the cursor, in terms of adoption versus risk. It's not unusual to see organizations have the left hand of the organization saying, we will use AI, and the executive level, and the right-hand side, the IT and the cyber and the legal, saying, for heaven's sake, don't use AI. Yeah, and so the balance between that two is still to play out. And that, before you even start to think about agentic AI, agents giving you the ability to manage processes driven by the maths rather than by the limitations of the human brain. So processes effectively being dynamic and adaptive across supply chain. Who's accountable when things go wrong there? There's a whole bunch of stuff yet to get to the bottom of. And technology will get there before the regulators do.
Okay, and so, Mark, you mentioned that, every 3 months and things are changing, and we've been talking about the pace and the speed. So let's try and look forward, and let's try and talk about what we might envisage seeing AI in strengthening supply chains, right? Like, what can we, what are we already potentially seeing happening for operating plants or other nuclear projects? So, how do you see that? If we can at least try, as I say. No, we can't predict the future.
If you like, I can start with some general outlook. What is happening today is quite often, if we are talking about AI, it's basically either built in certain solutions or bolted on certain solutions. However, the future is rather clear. The future will be more agentic agents. It's quite maybe not in this industry, but another industry, and where also basically the users of the IT systems will change. Instead of just looking on the current IT systems and just having some human checkpoints, we are, as IT industry, required to build completely new applications. We call them AI apps, which are just allow to monitor actually what an AI agent is doing, to have separate breakpoints where the human can decide, is this AI agent running the right direction? Are we applying the right guardrails for this AI agent and so on? So that is already happening now, and that is coming in the very near future, that we see that suddenly our user interfaces of our iPhones, of all the devices working with, are going to change quite dramatically very soon. On the other side, of course, there are already many use cases today where AI can help in the supply chain. Roughly, the rough number, our customers, 2/3 of our customers are using already supply chain. And I think it's always good to look into different industries. For example, if you recently maybe got a rental car, many rental cars companies in the meantime all already using AI. So I recently needed to go through some light tunnel, which is checking the car when you check it out and when you check it in. And they know automatically exactly what happened with this car in the meantime. Is there any kind of small damage in this car? And we have similar techniques which are especially used by logistic providers to recognize, for example, is any shipping damaged? Was any shipping tampered with? So these are things already happening today, and this could be, of course, technology we could be applied also to the nuclear supply chain going forward.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing the examples. Any other futures-orientated thoughts?
My job at the CNSC is predicting the future. I'm always wrong. But I have a slightly different take on where the future is going to be 12 months from now. And I'll look at ChatGPT 3. When that first came out, everyone was using it. It was wonderful. 4 came out. 4 was phenomenal. But 4 completely scraped the internet. Anything that was in there had been scraped. 5 comes out. The ability, the improvement is minimal, because it had already scraped everything. But not only had it scraped everything, it had scraped everything that was also AI created. So there's estimates that over 50% of what's on the internet right now is AI generated. So my future 12 months from now is that we actually have had some time to pause, because it's not progressing quite as fast as it has in the past. We can collect our breaths, and we can actually look at how we're going to get bespoke AI tools that will actually augment the nuclear supply chain, and we can get away from all this noise that's being created by these tools, be it Gemini, be it ChatGPT, be it whatever, that most people are using.
Okay, so let's say we have a little bit of time to pause. What measures should we then be working on to take to prevent AI from being used to negatively impact supply chain resilience?
So do you want me to take that?
Sure,
Okay.
and then everyone else can jump in.
So I'm going to go back to the work we've been doing with the Vienna Center on non-proliferation and decommissioning. AI, cybersecurity, supply chain. AI, and I'm sure everyone in this room is familiar with vibe coding. AI allows someone who doesn't even know how to code, gives them the ability to basically launch a cyber attack. And from that point of view, I'm hoping that we will have the time to address that and to realize what a threat cyber can potentially provide, because people who, let's say, are mediocre bad actors right now have a very strong ability to negatively influence the supply chain, to introduce errors, to totally disrupt the supply chain. And hopefully we can focus enough on cyber that we can mitigate and know how to deal with these and use AI to up the game of, let's say, the good guys.
And I can confirm from the IT point of view that is already done. So basically there is, if we're talking about companies like Cloudflare, internet companies, they're already using AI today. And of course, the interesting thing is actually which side is the dark side and the bright side, which is going to be better, right? But it's very clearly that we did democratize really AI and help people who maybe didn't have the education, didn't have the chance today to be a bad actor. So the amount of bad actors may be increasing. That's absolutely true.
Yeah.
I would add, when we think about supply chain resilience, thinking about a robust supply chain and all of the elements to that, one thing that AI is fantastic at is optimization. And it optimizes. There's an incredible opportunity for AI to optimize across the supply chain. It is truly incredible. But that optimization can also have a human impact. It can have an impact on your supply, and I've already mentioned. But when we're working with our smaller and our local suppliers in the communities where we're building or where we have established operations, you have to realize that the other end of these purchase orders and things, there's people, there's jobs, et cetera. So how do you impact the communities as a consequence of this? And just understanding the consequence of some of the actions that we take, which look good on the computer screen, and the AI thinks it's the right thing to do, but there's also a human element to it. And we need to build that in, because ultimately, by having to ensure a robust supply chain, you need that diversity and that strength. And ultimately, for nuclear to be successful, we need those supportive communities where we operate.
So let me amplify a couple of points on security. And if you want to ask me about the future afterwards, I will answer that question as well. The security point, absolutely. There's both the internal elements and how you can use this technology to help validate parts, vision processing, looking for patterns in the supply chain. All of that will help. And of course, as said, it opens up a whole new set of attack vectors, both inside the models themselves. There's plenty of evidence that can be done now in terms of essentially Trojan horse attacks inside models that can then be found later with complex prompts. That's a thing now. And relatively low-skilled bad actors, never mind the professional groups of bad actors, have a whole new set of toys to play with now. And the level of volume of attack and the sophistication, and again, think multiple agents operating at speed on high-performance platforms, it's a whole different game now in terms. So I think we're going to see, certainly in the UK, one sees every few weeks another organization get hit in a way we probably did maybe 10, 15 years ago. There's a whole new generation of cyber threat now. So I understand why a lot of internal cyber teams and IT teams are very nervous about opening the doors on the application of this technology. And it's a real conflict with the fear of missing out side of the argument and the commercial imperative to use the technology. And that's a lot of what organizations are having to deal with at the moment.
While you have the floor, do you want to talk to us about the future?
About the future, that's
Sure.
a great question. Thanks, Lisa. I'll say a couple of things about that. I think I'll talk about the behavior and the discipline of engineering, and I'll talk about the type of ecosystem we will see, building on what I said before. I think the way we see this, particularly from an engineering point of view, is we're seeing a whole new, and I'll use the French word, I don't think we have a particularly good English word here, we're seeing a whole new métier, a whole new discipline of engineering. I used to be an academic many years ago. I could imagine teaching now at least a master's conversion course on augmented engineering, how you would engineer in an AI-powered way. It's changing the way we think about things. If you're a component designer on a complex part, and maybe the part goes obsolete, and you have to find a solution, and maybe your line manager says we need a new part, but you need a carbon reduction, a price reduction, and a weight reduction. Imagine now a collection of agents that you can give that problem to. You don't have to go across various different tools. You can work with a collection of agents who will work with a collection of agents in the Siemens tool chain or the Dassault tool chain, not to do it all for you, but to talk you through and act as a genuine co-pilot on the way that works. So the whole engineering discipline is going to adapt. That will be part of the future. And what we'll also see, and we're already starting to see now, particularly across supply chain, is the emergence of industrial AI ecosystems. So not just the utility that works with you as an organization, but we're seeing that spread across ecosystems. So you're starting to see the emergence of industry standard foundation models. We saw with Atomic Canyon yesterday the beginnings of that in nuclear. That's appearing elsewhere. You're now seeing the abilities then to share that information across the supply chain. Confidentiality is not such a big problem as it used to be. You can train shared models without compromising the security of the data. You can share the impact of the training without sharing the data. That's a solved problem. So at ecosystem level, at supply chain, that opens up a whole new ability to have more effective supply chain. So the future is going to be both the emergence of new things like that, but also the way we train and develop people and manage something that was said this morning, the balance between, most organizations now have, what, 5 generations of people? If you're not using this tech, you're not going to be able to recruit graduates. That's the reality. Everybody wants the same people. And if you're not using the tech, you're going to find it hard to recruit. But you're going to have other generations that are concerned about what it means for their job, the adaptation. So that whole people element of it shouldn't be underplayed either. And that'll be part of the new future.
Okay, well, thank you so much. I wanted to talk about the good guys, because we talked about the bad guys. And I wanted to ask you, how might collaborative mechanisms or other platforms enable AI-driven risk monitoring and compliance globally? So again, partnerships, collaboration. Can we talk a little bit about how you see different organizations, different actors working together, perhaps the role of organizations like the IAEA or others? Kevin, I see you nodding. Do you want to?
No, I don't want to start.
You don't want to start on this one. Okay. Anyone else want to?
I'm happy to
Mark,
start. Right? I think the positive of this event, I think these events may be part of collaboration and triggering collaboration, because we know we have an opportunity, maybe even a challenge, and we need to tackle this challenge. There's no way around it. We need to do it. AI is going to come, right? But I think there's more. We did already talk about regulation. We need to talk about standards. Potentially, we need to talk about ethics. We may also need to talk, and you just mentioned it, federated learning means earlier today we were talking about data and we don't like to share data. Yes, but in the age of AI, actually, you can share models without sharing the proper data. So there are opportunities to get this done. But if you want to do this done, then you need to have common IT platforms, common standards. So I think there is a lot of common ground, what needs to be done, what should be done. It will be challenging because here also the human psyche will fight it. Okay, if I'm sharing my model is something in my model which could actually tell something about my competitive advantage. So there are many questions we answered, but it can be done, and there's a lot of playground for common collaboration.
Okay, thank you. Andy?
I had a thought and it's disappeared. The sharing, no, I forgot. So we come back.
Okay. Nathan, do you want to talk about some?
I think that just maybe more broadly, when we think about how parties can work together with AI to further enable supply chain resilience, earlier we touched on the theme of commonality and the importance of commonality across borders, common technologies. With a vast array of different technologies, that makes it more challenging for the supply chain to support a lot of different designs, different technologies. It ultimately could get there. It can be very robust, very healthy, very vibrant. But one of the things that I've seen in my past lives is we look to, at least in our operations, implement uniformity where we can. So instead of having 20 different kinds of a particular part, or 20 different, it's servicing 20 different, that all go into 20 different something else, can you actually get down to 5? And it might be suboptimal in one area, but if you look at it at a system level, it's much more optimized. And so we did a lot of rationalization of our supply chain to reduce inventory, become more common. If we then think more, take that kind of approach, we had a global organization with assets around the world, and we were achieving that kind of level of uniformity and commonality across the globe within our business. But if you apply that to nuclear and look, if you take reactor designs across borders and across, between different companies that are operating similar units, how do we share information on our supply chains in an appropriate way so that we can further increase supply chain resilience if something's not available in a particular region and it's needed somewhere else, we can actually have some some further resilience there, which is enabled when you have a reasonable level of uniformity. And it's one of the things that we're seeing, I guess, developing in some parts of our business now, which is quite exciting.
Thank you. Did it come back?
He's come back, yes. Thank you, Nathan. It helps. I mean, that point about simplifying parts, we 100% recognise that. That's absolutely an application area. And stopping engineers defining yet another part that actually already exists in the back catalogue with the supply chain. We absolutely see that. The point that I forgot before was about the evolution of the ecosystem. And I think we're starting to see the big players, what they do, the boundaries. We heard yesterday with the kind of exciting things Google are doing. Others are doing similar things. The boundaries are changing. And the way organizations cooperate, things that they thought were core before are becoming context and they're going to get rid of. And being able to manage data at scale, particularly at an industry level, you talk to the tool vendors, they often have data across their sector. So they're suddenly becoming very relevant for how you optimize things at supply chain. So we're seeing boundaries redrawn. When you combine that with the playbook on supply chain management, and then you combine that with organizations that are leaving use cases behind and thinking more about how do I implement this as a business partner, those are the organizations that you're seeing are making the fastest progress.
So I'm going to touch on what Nathan said. And there's a company in Canada, and what they do is they do work instructions, work procedures, and they're looking to basically use AI to standardize them in the nuclear industry. The founder comes from the aviation industry. And when he first approached me 4 years ago, he basically said, "You guys are idiots." And I said, "What do you mean?" He goes, "You're an accident waiting to happen." And I said, "Excuse me?" And he said, "Well, look," he goes, "in Canada, you have Bruce Power, you have OPG. They call a widget different things. It's the same widget, but they call them different things between the two operators." He said, "But it gets worse. OPG has 2 plants, both 8 unit. They call different things, widgets, differently between those 2 plants. There is no standardization of language, of lexicon in the nuclear industry. However, down the road, with AI, with these new builds, there is the opportunity, as you say, with a given, let's say, reactor technology or a reactor vendor, to standardize that in a far more, let's say, international manner. Question is which agency, who oversees that, how do you get that standardization, and how do you then leverage that into the supply chain? I definitely don't have a solution, but it's definitely an opportunity.
And I think what's interesting, I love SMRs, but in a way, one of the things that led to SMRs was that desire to create uniformity. Because by making them smaller, we can build more of them. And so we're chasing uniformity. Our dream is you get that uniformity, but you do it on a large scale.
Okay, great. Well, I think we've come quite naturally to the part on observations and recommendations, so hopefully you know the drill. And are you happy if I start with you? Would you like me to start on the end? Okay, perfect. So, Andy, you have the opportunity to kick off with your observations on supply chain. And again, if you want to build off some of the ideas from the past 2 days, these are sort of our final thoughts all together. So, yes, your observation.
Got it, perfect. So, really 3 observations, really. So the ramp-up challenge, clearly, and we've not talked too much about ramp-up challenge. I'll come back to that in the recommendation. But the ramp-up challenge is obvious, and the synergy between the need for power and the use of the power, very, very, very well made all day. What's very obvious, nuclear cannot afford to rediscover all the lessons that have been learned by other sectors. Cannot afford to relearn the lessons learned by other sectors. There's been some great examples of work in this area over the last two days. The reality is, in other sectors, that's probably 12 to 18 months old. Nuclear can't afford to rediscover the lessons that others have learned. So there needs to be a way to accelerate that, and the means is there. Okay, so that's my first observation. And the second really is around the hype around the topic. AI has this interesting space in that it is both overhyped and underhyped. The overhype is you'd think we discovered magic. Yeah, and you can mentally swap the word AI for magic when you hear people talk about, oh, do you think we could use some AI to solve this problem? It's so overhyped, it's very difficult to establish reality. But the reality is that it is transformational. And it's transformational in a way that 5G was, that IoT was, and those transformational technologies are not implemented use case by use case. They're implemented in a much more fundamental way, and we've talked about some of those issues.
Thank you. Nathan?
I'd build on that point around transformation. Yesterday, Luz made the comment about AI for energy and energy for AI. And what's really exciting about this event yesterday and today is talking about the opportunities for growth in nuclear to support this massive demand for AI, for compute. But when you play that back and looking at how AI can be transformational for nuclear and for the supply chain, and we talked yesterday, Lou also talked yesterday about some of the work that Westinghouse is doing with Google. We see opportunities to learn, I wouldn't say learn from lessons from the past, but change the past, and we'll move towards a future where we actually are building things on time, on schedule. And you can look at the application of AI and take what would have been your base case for a schedule pre-AI, and now you've optimized that incredibly with AI. I don't know what the percentage would be, but you'll see, I think, a material reduction in schedule as a consequence, and that then translates into cost. So you see a levelized cost of energy impact that AI is going to have on nuclear. So I think AI can bring this massive tailwind to the nuclear sector and actually change the learning curve. I mean, this has been, everyone's familiar with the incredible learning curves that we've seen in renewables, in solar and in wind, and yet nuclear's gone in the other direction. And so here's an opportunity to pivot and actually start to see the learning curve application to nuclear, and how do we actually bring down the levelized cost of energy in nuclear. And I think that's really possible now, and I'm just incredibly excited about it.
Thank you. Excellent. Mark?
Yeah, I think it's rather clear. Energy is the foundation of our society, right? And the people here in the room are actually here to bridge a gap which is existing. So I think we need to learn from what happened in other industries in order to speed up things. I think it's quite important to start things, and I know there are very specific challenges in this particular industry which makes it much more difficult to apply than in other industries. However, I think the secret is actually many operators and many people in the room sitting most probably on very valuable data, because AI is about data. And I think we may miss also an opportunity to take actually what we have today and just try to analyze the data and to find patterns. Just one thing here, actually. In the IT industry, you may recognize a trend which we called forward deployed engineers. And those engineers do the following. They just visit companies and customers, just get access to the data, put it in AI systems, and try to understand, do we see something the human mind didn't see before? And usually the answer is yes. And this could be a treasure trove for the future to make things better in the future. And this may be one of the first things where you're not touching everything. AI doesn't have any decision power, just creating insights for human to think actually, what can we do to improve? This could be the next step.
Okay. Thank you. Kevin?
So I'll go back to my opening remarks and maybe a subset of that. I think observation number one, if you think of that thought experiment I laid out that we did 5 years ago, with, in essence, AI producing, knowing that the part's going to fail, producing the part, installing the part, your supply chain is going to look nothing like it's looked historically. So what does that mean? The second observation is you have a supply chain that needs to consider the humans that are going to be involved in that supply chain, and nuclear will have an issue getting qualified humans, like every industry is going to, who understand AI as well as the industry that they're in. And it's not just, let's say, nuclear who's facing this challenge, it's everyone, every industry is facing the same challenge. So those are my two observations.
Okay, thank
Supply
you.
chain.
And are you happy to head back with recommendation? Yep.
I'll
okay.
come back. So in terms of the future, I mean, I think it's pretty simple. There's no one regulator that can project the future, see the future, and be ready for the future. It has to be through collaboration. It starts at things like this. It continues through collaboration, be it with the IAEA, ISOP, be it the NEA, and I'll touch on the NEA, not just the reg lab I talked about, where we look at these, future issues and how do you safely deploy these. And you have regulators and you have, operators, technology service providers, academia there. And you also have something else that's pretty unique at the NEA. They've started a program called AI Expertise. I don't know if you guys are familiar with it. And the idea is that they've, I think, kind of are leaning on it's easier to take someone who's in the nuclear industry and upskill them on AI. So what they've just launched is a pilot program to actually see how feasible that is. So if you're interested, look up the NEA, look up AI Expertise, and it's such a program. So I guess what I'm saying is that no country, no regulator, no vendor, no operator can do this on their own. We all need to share the information. We need to do it together. That's what I would say.
Thank you. Mark, recommendation?
Yeah, two things. Number one is actually, as we mentioned before, AI is not a silver bullet. So number one, we need to understand where are really the problems and how can AI potentially, together with other technologies, help. Supply chain is for sure one of those areas, but AI alone may not be the answer. We discussed, for example, blockchain. That is number one. Number two is actually, I teased it before, I think the crawl, walk, run, fly approach is very important. Start with crawling. Start to understand, without even touching existing systems, for example, your current data. Maybe you're going to recognize something in the data which is going to help you. Then start walking also with predictive AI, where the human is in the loop. Then move over to Gen AI, for example, in manufacturing. Then one day we may be moving over to agentic AI and so on. So we just need to start, and we use actually the potential, which may be also not being conflicting with regulation and security guidelines, so on. So I think we can start today.
Thank you. It's encouraging. Nathan?
Yeah, probably building on some prior comments around the people impact of this. AI operates within a system, and that system is full of individuals. It ends up being a massive change management exercise, and anyone who's done any work in the field of change management, we usually get it wrong more than we get it right. So I think, how do we think about both the application and the deployment of AI in our industry and organizations? Think about the people that are being affected, both positively and sometimes not so much. And how do we work with the individuals who are part of this system to ensure successful applications and deployment of AI? Because I think that's a huge part about getting it right. You've got the tool, but then actually applying that tool in a successful way requires a lot of thought and a lot of effort. And even if you might eventually get there, there's an opportunity to get there much faster by really thinking thoughtfully about how you do that. And here's also where I think the second part of my recommendation, which relates to this, is how do we, and others have already mentioned this, but how do we learn from other industries? I think there's so many opportunities to do the benchmarking. And by the way, AI is great at benchmarking, and it can do that in all different aspects, but this is another one where it can enable us to look at other industries, aerospace or pharma, and where can we learn from those and bring those into this industry. I think sometimes we can be a bit head in the sand, and there's so many opportunities for us to look outside of the nuclear sector, see what others are doing, find the best practice, and then bring those in and apply it.
Thanks a lot.
I
like all of those. I've got four. The fourth one I'll do last because it builds on what Nathan just said. The three that strikes me when you step back and look, okay, how does this industry accelerate in the way that we've talked about. And I like a lot the work that the World Economic Forum does in this space. They write some really good quality position papers on application of new technology. And the point being, as an industry, we can't afford for everyone to learn the lessons by ourselves. So there could be a role for the agency here in sponsoring and helping to build alignment on, and I've picked out 3 referentials really. I think there's one, if you buy my point about AI is really a business critical partner for you, the architecture of that, well, does every organization have to define that architecture by themselves? Or is the benefit at an industrial level arriving at least some principles for that? Yeah, there probably aren't huge competitive differentiations, given that the industry as a whole needs to move forward. So a referential architecture for AI's utility, for me, would be something that is needed. The second, you take the industrial AI ecosystem idea across the supply chain. Again, there will be a referential architecture inside there. Everyone will have to build their own anyway, so why not build one that works for the industry? That would be my second one. And then the third, which we haven't talked about too much, but it was talked about yesterday, was the challenges of ramp-up. Ramp-up is not straightforward. It's not just a question of deploying budget to build these new things, and we've heard how difficult it is to get budget for these things. It's not just about that. And we have good examples worldwide of industries that, for a variety of reasons, have tried to ramp up over the last decade or so. And we kind of know what the playbook is in terms of material shortages, quality control, logistic problems, financial talent workforces. The playbook is starting to become relatively well defined for how do you ramp up an economic zone supply chain. And actually the part that AI can play in accelerating that, again, is becoming relatively well defined. So again, I think there's space for a reference architecture there, where actually it's in everyone's interests to share good expertise. So I think there's a part for the agency perhaps to play in promoting those 3 architectures. That would help everybody. And my last comment, recommendation really, it builds on what Nathan says. And I 100% agree. This is changing the way we do our work. No one owns the truth in this space. No one owns the truth. And it's a lot more than just doing things you already know how to do in a different way. So my one final recommendation, dare I say it, for everybody is go and play. Play with the technology. It's at your fingertips now. It's at your fingertips, almost certainly with the tools that you have already in your commercial environment, or if not, you will definitely have it at home. Go and play. It's the best way to start to understand the art of the possible, and find a buddy, work with someone that doesn't look like you, looks different, and you'll share and build good ideas on how to move this forward.
Well, those are some great concluding words. Go play ethically, responsibly, safely. It's a really nice way to end the panel. Thank you so much to all of you. These were really interesting insights into the supply chain. We've been highlighting how the resilience of the supply chain is really critical for the nuclear sector, and where AI offers powerful opportunities, and we talked also about some challenges there, but to strengthen the supply chain moving forward and into the future with all these exciting opportunities. So thank you so much. I will ask everyone to join me in thanking our panel. So ladies and gentlemen, we now invite you to take a short break, and coffee and refreshments have been provided by KEPCO ENC, so many thanks to them. Please take advantage again of the time to network. It's now down to the final opportunities before we conclude the symposium. Please stay with us for the closing session after the break. We will reflect on some key takeaways, some next steps, and we'll reconvene at 4 p.m. See you then.